watching Breakthrough News, and this is the Freedom Side. Welcome, everybody. I am one of your hosts, Eugene Puryear, normally here alongside my intrepid co-host, Rania Khalek, who is out again this week. But as she has informed me, I should announce to all of you, she will be back next week. She had to have a surgery. Everything went very well, but she is 100% on the comeback trail and is absolutely getting ready to be back with us here. She may even be watching now. I'm not even 100% sure of that. So if you're out there, shout out to you, Rania, but she will be back with us again next week, which is why I've yet to reveal my new Instagram account. I wanted to do a joint reveal with Rania. It was, her urging that we do this. So it felt to rob her of the joy of seeing it revealed to the Breakthrough News viewers would not be correct. So I'm here with you this week. We will be back again with you together next week, but we've got a great show lined up for you here this week, as we always do. And I'll use that as a reminder for everyone who is watching on YouTube to go ahead and hit the subscribe button, then use the down arrow so that you can turn on the alerts so that you are alerted to the things that you have subscribed to, so you don't have to look very far in order to catch all the great content coming out here from Breakthrough News, including Dispatches with Rania Khalek. So lots of great stuff that you want to be very hooked into, but that is not going to happen if you are not subscribed and if you don't have notifications turned on. If you happen to be watching on Free Speech TV, you don't need to do anything else really, but just continue to follow Free Speech TV, continue to watch us there, continue to watch all the great shows there. And a big shout out to the FSTV team for making it possible for us to appear on that platform. And finally, before we get started with the show, just to remind people that, of course, we are alternative independent media. We could always use your help and assistance. And if you would like to do so, you should go to patreon.com/breakthrough news. That's patreon.com/breakthrough news. You can get all sorts of things, including this fantastic mug that I have here. But most importantly, you are going to, as Rania says, be contributing to help keep us going and growing. Just look, I'm trying to fill two roles. You got to do what you got to do. But that being said, shout out to all of our existing patrons. Yeah, everything you've done so far has been indispensable. I can't even really begin to describe how important your support has been. So to all our new patrons, you'll be joining an illustrious group of people who have done quite a bit to keep Breakthrough News humming along. So patreon.com/breakthrough news. So we're going to jump right into it. And we're going to start with a story that it's making some headlines, not major headlines, and that is, clashes, airstrikes, all the tensions, however you want to put it, between Afghanistan and Pakistan. Serious uptick there in hostilities between the two countries, and a lot of people being caught in the crossfire. So a lot to discuss here in terms of that, and we are very happy to be joined here on the show once again by Obaidullah Baheer, who is a political commentator and lecturer at the American University of Afghanistan. Obaidullah, thanks so much for being back with us. Well, great to have you here with us. And I guess maybe to start here, I think some people may not even know exactly what's going on. If you could just give us some framing. I mean, there's been border clashes, there's been airstrikes, civilians have been killed, there's all sorts of accusations being thrown around. So what is actually maybe some baseline framing for what's happening here? Oh, can you hear me?
First off, I responded saying thank you for having me here, but somehow the students, I can't hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Please go ahead.
Okay, perfect. Always happy to be here. It's a volatile situation, Eugene. Depends on how much time you have to break it down, but we can go in reverse with what has transpired. Yesterday, there was a bombing in Kandahar city, one of the biggest cities in the country, where we had 17 civilians killed, more than 350 injured. We had multiple bombings that happened in Kabul city, the capital. Now, this was the second incident of bombing in Kabul. The first one was done a few days prior to that. This was the first time in the history of Pakistan-Afghanistan relations where Pakistan directly hit the capital of Afghanistan. So the casualties from just yesterday's strikes on Kabul and Kandahar uh, are 23 civilians dead, more than 550. Um, the bombing in daily model of taking matters into their own hands, they perceive to be a threat. So the context of why we got here is, so for your viewers, the Afghan Taliban, or the Taliban, the OGs, they took over Afghanistan in 2021 in August. They've been fighting the US occupation for 20 years. After a peace deal signed between them and the United States, they were going to come to power politically, but they militarily took over the country with a blitzkrieg that was quite effective, 11 days, which was then later outdone by the Syrians. But those are the Taliban that rule Afghanistan. Now, there's another entity called the Pakistani Taliban, the TTP, right? Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan. Now, these are a group of people who live within the frontier regions between Pakistan and Afghanistan. And those people were encouraged at that time by the intelligence agencies and the establishment of Pakistan to harbor the Afghan Taliban while they were fighting the Americans. Because it was interesting, there were Pakistani generals that would say, we defeated America with the help of America, because they were playing both sides. They were taking funds from the United States while supporting the Taliban to have a controlled chaos within Afghanistan. And the thing is, in Pakistan, I mean, for those of you who are familiar with the history of Pakistan, since its 78 years of foundation, vast majority of it has been under military rule. Even now, the civilian government says that it is under a hybrid rule, which in essence means that the army is in charge. And that means you really have to create a Schmittian world of like universal enmity. You constantly have political enemies that you have to fight, and there's a siege mentality that is constantly fed to the citizens. So the TTP is just one of the many groups that the Pakistani establishment is currently fighting. They're also fighting Baloch separatists who are within another province in Balochistan. They're asking to be separated from Pakistan. There's a Tehreek-e-Labbaik Pakistan. Those are a religious zealot group who are asking for more vocal stances on Palestine. They're being prosecuted. So there's a lot of mess happening in Pakistan. But what Pakistan constantly keeps doing is saying that the TTP, and while it's hitting military targets within Pakistan, they keep blaming Afghanistan for it. They keep blaming Afghanistan for harboring the TTP. Now, it's quite interesting because exactly 4 years ago, before the Taliban took over, the Afghan government of the time constantly used to say, Pakistan is harboring the Afghan Taliban. Why are they doing that? And the Pakistani establishment's response would always be, well, have you even looked at how large the border between us is? It's so difficult to police. It's mountainous and all of that. So they would throw that excuse. However, now when they hear it back from the Afghan Taliban, it isn't very pleasant. And they constantly expect the Afghan Taliban to make an enemy out of the Taliban within Pakistan. And they started the first attack in Kabul, trying to hit the leader of the TTP. They claimed he was traveling in Kabul. So it's interesting. They were trying to pull an Osama bin Laden on us, where the United States commits an operation deep in the heartland of Pakistan. And basically, the Pakistani regime is caught with their pants down. And they tried to do that with Kabul a few days ago. However, a voice clip emerges. The leader of the TTP says he's not in Afghanistan. He is in the frontier region. He's alive. He was never hit. But just that theatric led to retaliation from the Taliban across the border, because this wasn't the first time the Pakistanis were bombing Afghan territory, violating Afghan sovereignty. And look, at the end of it, okay, politics aside, when you intentionally hit civilians, when you bomb some of the most populated areas of a city, including Taimani, which is like an extreme, like I wouldn't even want to drive through that area during rush hour, and you hit it during rush hour, and you hit an oil tanker, and you hit a religious school. There are videos out there that show people with their bones out and screaming on the roadside. I mean, and the fact that the world really didn't blink twice about it also shows you that there's this we've talked about this before. There's a hierarchy of death. And I know you're not happy with the situation, political situation in Afghanistan, but why does the common Afghan life and death matter so little?
No, I think it's a great point, and I think it speaks to a deeper reality. I think that we have mentioned in terms of this hierarchy of death and who it is, and I think especially in the West, the conception of Afghanistan, and I guess the other aspect of this that people are talking about is sort of the quote unquote sort of geopolitics. I mean, this is happening as the Afghan foreign minister is in India, and the U.S. is trying to get Bagram Air Force Base, or at least Trump is saying that in Oval Office speeches, and there's, I'm sure as you've seen, many different theories circulating about who and what regional and international powers may or may not be behind this or that machination. And I wonder how you feel this fits into the overall reality of sort of post-Taliban returning to power, regional and international politics for Afghanistan.
I mean, look, Trump is amazing in his revisionist memory. He makes stuff up, and he just says whatever he heard in the last meeting he was in, so the next shiny thing just distracts him. And hopefully, if we don't mention Bagram long enough, he'll forget that it exists. It's not like he knows where it is to begin with. But saying that, you have to realize that this whole conversation regarding Bagram just stemmed out of nowhere. It had no factual truth to it. And the fact that the Doha deal that the Trump administration signed with the Taliban says that there will be no foreign troops within Afghanistan. So it's suddenly Trump is hit by Biden's amnesia, and forgets that he had signed a deal that said they would not have foreign troops, which includes Bagram as well. And the thing is that the Chinese and the Russians will not be happy, will not allow U.S. military presence so close to their borders anymore. This isn't 2001 anymore. So that discussion aside, but then also with the current politics between Pakistan and India, I mean, look, we're the third neighbor that Pakistan has militarily engaged with in the past 22 months. They've gone to, they've had military hostilities with Iran, with India, and now with us, right? I mean, Jeffrey Sachs says when you're constantly engaged in war, then your policy is war. It's not diplomacy, So the war being a policy there is extremely problematic. There are matters, even if the TTP is a concern, even if we take their assumption or their allegation that TTP operates within Afghanistan or their members within Afghanistan, there needs to be a dialogue, right, to solve these matters. I mean, tell me how this makes sense, Eugene. You're saying the Afghan Taliban aren't helping me enough with the TTP. So how about I drop bombs on their cities? Because somehow that will magically make them want to help me. You're increasing the cost of compliance from the Taliban. Once you're dropping bombs and killing civilians, the Taliban look horribly weak if they concede to your demands, So this is like flipping the table over when you don't like the game, and that doesn't make sense politically speaking. And ultimately, when you're hitting civilians, what you're doing is regimes change. The Taliban might not be around, the Pakistani governments might change, but once you've poisoned this well between people, when people start seeing the other person as an enemy, that doesn't go away soon, and it's not like we can magically lift our roots and march somewhere else on the globe and just become someone else's neighbor, right? This whole irrationality. And Eugene, when we teach foreign policy, a very important model is the rational actor model. So if you and I are engaging with each other, it's based on, I assume rationality on your part and you assume it on my end. But when both sides are irrational, it constantly leads to escalation. We're going to go into the abyss, right? And who pays the ultimate price? It's the soldiers on the Pakistan side. It's the civilians on the Afghan side. And why? Why are we here? Why is there no larger sense of this immediate victory, the bravado that's involved, the military might and the muscle flex? But what then? Like the whole argument of there are no winners to wars, there are only losers. That's what takes shape. So by the way, there has been a ceasefire declared. So yesterday, right after the bombing of both cities by Pakistan, there was a ceasefire agreed. The GCC countries, so the Gulf countries, intervened. Some say that the United States placed a call as well. I'm 100% sure it wasn't placed on the Afghan side, maybe on the Pakistani side. The Chinese want it resolved. So they're supposed to meet in a day or two. The 48-hour ceasefire is still ongoing. but they're supposed to meet in Qatar and have this discussion face to face. I don't understand what exactly could be agreed upon, but at the core of it, there needs to be a respect for international law. There needs to be a respect for another nation's aerial sovereignty, territorial integrity. And if Pakistan does not pledge this, we'll constantly have a reignition of these conflicts and hostilities. And it does no one any good. And at the core of it, is a colonial line. It's a colonial separator where the British ages ago draw a line on the map and they say, this is India and this is Afghanistan, and they take away territory from Afghanistan. Then they give that territory to Pakistan, which is another state that they create. And somehow both sides have an issue with this delineation or demarcation, and it is at the core of it. But then there's also a lot of irrationality and specifically militaristic thinking on the Pakistan side that keeps bringing us to this point. Like, the point is, within the past 40 years, Pakistan has always aligned itself with anti-state elements in Afghanistan. So it's not the Taliban. Like, we can take them out of the equation. It's not the Taliban they have a problem with. They have a problem with every government that we've had for the past 40, 50 years. And then that begs the question, what is the plan? If you're never going to be happy, even this TTP, your own Hillary Clinton and others used to say that they're keeping snakes in their backyard. They're playing both sides. They're harboring extremist elements, and these chickens are going to come to roost someday. And when they are, then suddenly it's Afghanistan's problem. Suddenly Afghanistan needs to make compromise. And if they don't, we'll just punch down and hurt Afghan civilians. We don't have any aircraft. We don't have air defenses. So like, how macho does it make you look when you bomb my civilians? Like, you took up an empty sky and you're now happy that you have aerial dominance over a regime that has no air force, So it's just a very sad set of affairs. And again, the United States had a role to play in this. Like, they were here for 20 years and they leave it a bigger mess than it was. So where was the whole slogan of nation building and reconstructing post-conflict? And you caused a conflict, left it in a conflict, and now you switch off, So we are busy with everything else and trying to win the Nobel Peace Prize while leaving this whole region as a mess.
No, absolutely. Well, I don't know if it's hubristic, but certainly imperialistic in terms of the way they move around the pieces on the board, regardless of what the consequences are. Well, a lot to watch, a lot to continue to follow here, many things to say. And as always, we really appreciate you, Obaidullah, giving us some of your time here on the Freedom Side.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me again.
Well, this is a story that we will continue to follow and continue to look at. A lot of different angles to it. Some we didn't even get to. The refugee crisis, for instance, and the millions of Afghans being, regularly deported, which has also spiked in the context of this. So Obaidullah, definitely a good person to follow, and we will continue to follow the story in Afghanistan and Pakistan and around the world, wherever it is necessary. But certainly, I think the point he ended on there in regards to the U.S. role in creating many of these entities and organizations going all the way back to the 1980s, and the Cold War meddling and the post-Cold War meddling and the new Cold War meddling. You can't abstract out the role of the United States in all of these various conflicts, whether it's direct or indirect, and oftentimes it's more direct than we think, but it's not always in our face. So anyway, we'll continue to watching that move from Afghanistan to Argentina. Talking about U.S. meddling, the United States is bringing in a massive bailout, or trying to, of the Milei administration in Argentina, and what seems to be also an open attempt to meddle in their elections. So to get into all of that and more, we are very, very honored to be joined here on the show by Gisela Cernadas, who is an economist and organizer with the No Cold War campaign. Gisela, thank you so much for being with us.
Hi, Eugene. Thank you so much for having me here today. Well, I think you've introduced the topic already. There was a meeting between an Argentinian delegation and President Trump last week. And I gotta say first that it wasn't just another meeting, but it was a meeting to consolidate an ideologically based geopolitical alliance. So Trump and Trump's administration, they expressed their full support to Milei, who fundamentally stands on the anti-China side of the world order that the U.S. wants to impose currently. And Milei's administration also defends openly the extreme libertarian market idea that Trump is promoting, and that he's really interested in making them succeed and showing that that's the kind of economy that the people should have in the world. Furthermore, I would say that on the ideological side, Milei has faithfully followed the US leadership in this international order. He has shown open support to Israel and recently has allowed the presence of a new US military base in the south of Argentina. Thus, Milei is an ideologically ally of the US. And it is worth to note as well that Argentina has key resources that the US is fully interested in accessing to, such as the lithium, the oil, the rare earth that are in the core of the geopolitical discussions in today's agenda. Regarding this agreement, I will say that first, it is safe to be a swap agreement, meaning an exchange of currencies between the Central Bank of Argentina and the Federal Reserve in the US. But we don't fully know the details. The details haven't been disclosed. I mean, we don't know what are the conditions of this agreement. We don't know how this agreement is going to be executed. But we do know that this is a significant amount of money, is about $20 billion. And there is a discussion whether this swap agreement represents a hidden bill to Argentina or not. As in, does Argentina really have the capacity to repay it? So it is a bill of the US government, or is it a loan? That's a discussion. And it has been widely criticized, not only in Argentina, but also on the US side. And it was widely criticized both on the Republican Party or sectors of the Republican Party and also of the Democrats. The Republicans, by saying that this bill, let's call it bill because it is what it is, Argentina doesn't have the capacity to repay $20 billion. This bill doesn't fit in this slogan of America First, right? The Republicans are saying, why are you saying that you are putting America first and then you are bailing your friends and the friends of this friend? And on the second side, like the Democrats are saying, well, this money could have been used in education and health. So while Trump's administration is saying that they have not enough funds or they have their hands tied to increase the public spending, they are showing that they have their hands tied when it comes to rescue an ally in this new international order that they want to impose. So a point that you pointed out when you started the introduction is, what are Trump's real intentions behind this bill? And there is no other than supporting Milei regarding the next elections, the parliamentary elections that will take place in Argentina in 10 days from now, on October 26th. On the Argentina side, these funds of the bill will be used not to invest on relevant matters for the economy, such as infrastructure, manufacturing, housing, education, or health, all the issues that are relevant for the working class. But they will, on the contrary, use to relieve the pressure on the foreign currency market that we have. So this relieving this pressure will relieve the pressure on the devaluation of the national currency, at least until the elections have passed. So in other words, those $20 billion will likely be transferred through financial speculation to the big players of the market, and then will be repaid, if it's repaid, through the taxes of the working class. And this is because Argentina has a structural imbalance on its current account, which means that the country needs more foreign currency to operate that it can capture through international trade or utilities remittances, for instance. And this imbalance is affecting the foreign currency market, creating devaluation pressure on the national currency, and thus affecting the real wages and the purchasing power of the people. And to solve this fundamental issue, there must be changes in the productive economy, in the productive structure, and in the economic development in Argentina. But this is not the destination of this fund. In this 20 billion, as I said, will be used to temporarily create an illusion of stability in Argentina that will give a better back to the government in the elections. So there is nothing to celebrate in Argentina about this agreement for the working class, not in Argentina, nor in the US. For Argentina's working class, as I say, if Argentina will repay this money, it means that the working class will be paying through taxes without receiving any kind of benefit of these funds that will be leaked out of the country. And for the US working class, there is nothing to celebrate as well. First, because if Argentina doesn't repay it, it's money that is just leaking out of the country. Second, because the government in the US is showing that they are turning its back to the basic needs of the population. So there's nothing to celebrate about this agreement. Regarding the elections, I would say that the government is facing a quite tough scenario, since not only the economic situation is worsening on a daily basis for the overwhelming majority of the working class, but also there were recent scandals about or involving the main political references of La Libertad Avanza, which is Milei's party. And these scandals hit the very core of values that the government said to promote. One of these scandals involved directly to Karina Milei, who's President Milei's sister, after her role in bribery and corruption was widely exposed. And another scandal that is more from the last 2 weeks involved José Luis Espert, who's the head of the candidates list for the elections of October 26, of whom it was disclosed that he was involved in receiving money from drug trafficking related to Fred Machado in the US. And this announcement came from the Bank of America and not from the leftist opposition, as the government says. So these scandals are hitting the government's credibility, since the mantra they repeated nonstop was that they wanted to put an end to the political elites and corruption in Argentina. And they are showing that first, their government is based on the conservative political elites of the country, and second, that they are really, really corrupt. So lastly, to say, La Libertad Avanza was strongly defeated during the parliamentary elections in Buenos Aires province last September. Buenos Aires is the province that comprises about 40% of the population of the country and is currently ruled by Axel Kicillof, who's a Peronist governor in the province since 2019. He has done an outstanding administration of the province and is one of the candidates that is or may run for election for presidential elections in the next couple of years. So with this precedent, now we got to see and keep tuned to see what happens next on the next elections.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm glad you brought up the issue at the beginning of sort of the political nature of how Milei has lined up with what Trump and other right-wing governments like that would like to see. Because the other aspect of this, that the Treasury Secretary, and pushing back on all the financial television that this is just a bailout, he says, well, no, this is to help Argentina because of the policies they've already implemented. And that feels important to me, that the U.S. is also celebrating the policies, because you look at the streets of Argentina and you see the huge protests, you see senior citizens being attacked by the police on the street. So I was hoping you could talk a little bit about the actual, austerity policies Milei has been putting in and their impact on the working class of Argentina, that now is what the U.S. Treasury is saying he's being rewarded for.
Mm-hmm. Well, Milei, since the very first day of government, has working on reducing the interference of the state in the economy, has been working on austerity policies, and in fact, if people may remember it, when he was during his campaign, he was all the time referring to a chainsaw, like kind of showing, I'm going to destroy the state, I'm going to cut it from the base. There were scandals in university, for instance. Most of the public universities in Argentina were facing budgetary difficulties, concretely not being able to work for the second half of the year. So there were massive struggles to defend the budget of education. The real wage of the workers increased significantly since the increases not even match the high inflation rates in the country. And here, a little bit difficult to talk about some statistics because the National Institute of Statistics of the country, who should provide the official data, is strongly manipulating the data. But the data shows that consumption is constantly falling. And to understand what's the role of consumption in Argentina, we should understand that despite the GDP is pushed forward through investment, what happens is that the investments in Argentina are in its majority not oriented to the exports, but oriented to the domestic market. So if people don't have money to afford the goods, they will for sure fail. So walking on the streets in Argentina, despite what the statistics of the government want to say, you can see that people cannot afford to go out, cannot afford to buy in the supermarket. And several statistics showing that about 80% of the households today have certain level of debt, and about percent of the household cannot reach the end of the month with the salaries that they are currently having. So the levels of poverty and homelessness are drastically increasing in the country, and the government has shown some figures saying that they have decreased the number of poor people. It was kind of ridiculous because according to the figures they had, there were more poor people than population in the country. That's how ridiculous their statistics are. So these austerity measures have deeply affected the economy. And if this week, furthermore, we have read the news that the government is aiming to and call already for the privatization of 4 key hydroelectrical plants in Argentina that were publicly owned. So this is also part of a transfer of resources from the public sector to the private sector, and especially to international capitals and not nationals. So that's the plan that Trump is praising.
Mm-hmm. Wow. A lot to say about that. And the other aspect of this, and I'm glad you brought up privatization, is now the Trump administration is saying they're going to try to look for this additional private loan facility of an additional $20 billion. And we'll see if they're able to come up with it. But they're basically trying to get as many investors as they can on board with this to also put money into Argentina. But I mean, this has been a challenge for Argentina going back many, many years. And it seems like just to even further trap the country in international debtors. I mean, we certainly saw this under Macri. We've seen this going back to 2001. That also seems to be somewhat ominous, to be saying that they're going to increase the role of Wall Street debts for the Argentine government as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. The debt trap in Argentina is terrible. When we talk about debt trap, we talk about the country working to pay the interest of the debt, not even being able to pay back the capital of that debt, and then adjusting all the economic structure of the country in the purpose of transferring the wealth produced by the workers in Argentina to main capitals in the north. And it's interesting also to note that Luis Caputo, who was part of the delegation of Argentina to the US to sign this $20 billion agreement, was the Minister of Finance of Argentina in 2018, when Macri's administration got the largest loan in the history of IMF for almost $50 billion. So we are still paying the interest of that debt, and it was the IMF itself who recognized that the funds used in that agreement were used for financial speculation and capital flight leaking out of the country, and not used in infrastructure or economic development as it was supposed to be used. So unfortunately, this $20 billion will be used for the same purpose. And just from our side in the working class, we gotta organize and get together to build a real alternative, not only to defeat in the elections on next October, but in 2 years for the presidential elections, and for sure to fight this idea that the libertarian market policies are the only path to follow, and that any kind of leftist idea will fail. Milei has an open speech against socialism, against communism, and that's part of the battle he wants to give in the country. He's there to give not only the economic battle and reform of the Argentinian economy in terms of worsening its its development and reprimarization of the economy, but also to deepen the ideological battle or the battle of ideas in the South, and destroy any kind of possibility of thinking of a project for the working class in the country.
Mm-hmm. Well, a lot to say and a lot to continue to follow, and we appreciate you joining us here. Gisela Cernadas, economist and organizer with the No Cold War campaign, to help us understand it all. Thanks so much for giving us some of your time here on the Freedom Side.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Well, just unbelievable. No money for healthcare, but we're going to send $20 billion to Argentina to support brutal austerity measures and as political blackmail. Amazing to see the things Trump is saying. We won't do anything to help Argentina unless you vote for Milei. Well, black and white. Couldn't be any clearer if you're wondering what's going on there. We want to obviously turn to another one of the critically important world issues, and that is the ongoing aftermath of the ceasefire in Gaza. And we are very, very honored to be joined for this conversation by Dr. Ramzy Baroud, who is a journalist, author, and editor of the Palestine Chronicle. Dr. Baroud, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Well, great to have you with us. And, I think obviously seeing some of the ceasefire violations by Israel and others, the thing that's on a lot of people's minds is what's the stability of the end of the conflict? Will the war restart? And I'm certainly curious your thoughts on that. But I think the other aspect to this that seems important to me is also how we frame the issue of the ceasefire, not as like Donald Trump being the great peacemaker, but the inability to use war to accomplish the goals they wanted in crushing the Palestinian people, which seems to, that the difference in framing seems important to understanding, how this may move forward in the coming days.
Absolutely. I think this is a fundamental realization what just has taken place in Gaza. In fact, so much propaganda effort, so many talking heads right now throughout the Middle East, notwithstanding, but throughout Western media, are trying to push us to actually think of what happened in Gaza is stalemate at best, but also somewhat victory for Israel. But this is not at all the case. We know exactly what Israel wanted to achieve in Gaza. They haven't been shying away from talking about it. They wanted to ethnically cleanse the Palestinians. Netanyahu called it voluntary migration. Others, threatened to drop a nuclear bomb on Gaza. They're not actually very good with propaganda, the Israelis. This whole idea that the Israeli Hasbara is so powerful, it is not. It is just because nobody is talking about it in mainstream media, and you don't see lots of Palestinians and pro-Palestinian voices countering these claims and allegations in this kind of nasty racist language. But at the end of the day, that's what they wanted. They wanted to ethnically cleanse Palestinians, and they wanted to build settlements and turn Gaza into the Riviera of the Middle East. For whom? For Israelis and for Americans, and where Jared Kushner is going to come and hang around at the Gaza beach where my refugee camps is located, almost totally destroyed, by the way. Did they achieve that? Not at all. They wanted to disarm the resistance. Did they achieve that? Not at all. What actually happened in Gaza is that for the first time in the history of this so-called conflict, do Palestinians not only teach Israel a very painful lesson, they actually prove that firepower alone cannot determine political outcomes. This is unprecedented. Yes, Hezbollah has done that in Lebanon. Yes, Ansarullah have managed to do that in Yemen. But you have this kind of new type of model of resistance. And I'm not talking, when I say resistance, by the way, I'm not referring to guns and bullets. I mean, the Palestinian Authority has supposedly 60,000 soldiers or security officers or whatever you want to call them. Not a single bullet was fired at the Israeli army. To the contrary, they are fired at dissenting Palestinian political voices and activists in the West Bank. So this is not about firepower. It's about the will of the people. The Palestinian people have once again proven to be the most important and central factor in determining the future of Palestine and the very stability of the Middle East. This whole idea that Arabs can normalize with Israel at the expense of Palestinians, and in the words of Jared Kushner, Palestinians can either put up or shut up, that turned out to be a false theory. It didn't happen, and it will not happen. The Palestinians are still in Gaza. They are still strong, and they are still fighting. And this is something is extremely infuriating for Israel, and in fact very worrying, not only for Israel and the US, but also for Arab regimes who do not want to see a strong Palestinian party that is capable of standing up to Israel, and by extension, standing up against all sorts of oppression underway in the Middle East.
No, I think that's such a great point. And I think it's one of the aspects that maybe has flown under the radar a little bit, certainly of Western media. I mean, even when you looked at the negotiations themselves of whether to accept the deal, you had Hamas saying, well, we're consulting the other factions, releasing the photos with various different groups, and now saying that they're open to many different types of solutions to what comes next, but it has to be a national solution. It has to be a Palestinian solution. So holding out the idea of a more unified Palestinian front and exercising some level of sovereignty over Gaza. I mean, that feels like an important kind of red line that they've drawn that, undoubtedly is upsetting Israel, America, and many others, but also feels like an important aspect of what comes next.
That's right. I mean, in fact, I have always argued that Palestinians are united. This myth, that the myth of Palestinian disunity, the myth of Palestinian fragmentation, I've always argued to the contrary. Palestinians are very united. It all depends on how you define the word unity. How do you find common ground between those who resist and those who collaborate, between those who stand against the enemy and those who are working with the enemy to oppress the people? There is absolutely no common ground there. But the unity of the Palestinians is the unity around their resistance, the unity around their steadfastness, their sumud, a unity to stand up to Israel, to the Israeli colonial project, to Israeli apartheid. That is something that we all have in common, from Gaza to the West Bank to East Jerusalem to Palestinians in the Shatat, in diaspora as well. And we have never really seen that idea. I mean, it's very vindicating, although it's vindicating at a very high price, is that now we see what Palestinian unity looks like. When we see the prisoners leaving, whether those who came to the West Bank, those in Gaza, those who were deported to Egypt, and you see the people around them celebrating them despite of the horrific price that was paid of the blood of innocent children and men and women in Gaza for that freedom, but they still prioritize the freedom of their prisoners, of the people, over all the sacrifice. I mean, this is unity at work. And again, Israel did everything in its power to break the unity of the Palestinians. They tried to turn the people of Gaza against each other. They tried to create all sorts of ultimatums, putting pressure on this party and that party, but the unity never faltered, despite the fact that 92% of the entire Gaza Strip has been destroyed. If this is not a testament to the resilience, strength, and the unity of the Palestinian people, I really don't know what is.
Mm-hmm. And obviously, I mean, no one has a crystal ball here, but I mean, I wonder what you think about some of these to me, seemingly fantastical plans that are being cooked up in Washington and Tel Aviv. Tony Blair as a colonial governor and international forces, although no country seems to really want to be willing to, 100% commit. I mean, it seems that there's a lot of ideas out there for some, neo-colonial structure, but in reality, it's going to be difficult to find something that can work here that doesn't have a lot of Palestinian sovereignty at the core, it seems.
Absolutely. How can they impose such a pathetic figure, a hated war criminal like Tony Blair, on the Palestinians in Gaza when they have failed to impose any of their objectives or conditions on them over the course of 2 years at the price of the very destruction of Gaza? And they failed to achieve anything. Do you think really that the Palestinians at this point, after all of these sacrifices, would be willing to have another colonial overlord, some other, white British colonialists who tried to colonize Iraq and failed, to come back to Gaza and become the governor of Gaza? I mean, this would be the ultimate humiliation. I don't think any Palestinian is willing to even entertain such an idea. I remember one of the leaders of the various political groups in Gaza referred to him as the son of the devil. I don't think they are going to be working with the son of the devil anytime soon. And by the way, they've tried this. I mean, Jared Kushner has been shopping for any country. And I'm talking about Trump's first term in office. Jared Kushner spent so much time trying to cancel UNRWA, the UN Palestinian Refugee Agency, to force Jordan to accept millions of Palestinian refugees at a price, to completely dismantle the entire Palestinian National Project, and they failed. Now he comes, Jared Kushner, with Tony Blair, thinking, well, you know what, maybe we can leverage medicine and food for political concessions. I mean, it doesn't get lower than this. There are thousands of Palestinians trapped under the rubble of Gaza. Thousands among them are children. And then they come and say, you know what? Hey, we are happy to help you dig up the bodies, but you have to make few political concessions for us, because we are still thinking that there's a potential for a Riviera in the Middle East here. I mean, the world has to be even more enraged than they already are over the genocide, because this is genocide and humiliation, and the Palestinians would not accept either.
No, it's a great point. And yeah, history. I remember after the Oslo Accords, they said that Gaza was going to be the Riviera and going to be this great thing. And we see how it ended up. And I guess, to maybe close the circle on this a little bit, I mean, it feels that the issue of the ultimate solution, of course, everyone has been talking about the two-state solution, all the European countries, everyone trying to bring that back, which also seems to be sort of fantastical and in the past. And we're seeing maybe more starkly now than ever that, democracy and self-determination is basically the only way this can be resolved. Any colonialism and apartheid, it seems that any other solution just seems like a sideshow at this point.
Absolutely. I mean, this whole the carrot of the two-state solution has been going on for such a long time. They played this game with the Palestinians. And by the way, well, yeah, sure, we will give you a state, but that state will lack physical contiguity, and that state would have to accept certain kind of illegal Jewish settlements in it. And you will have no territorial or you will have no actual defense forces. You will have no control over the borders, and so forth and so on. And sadly, they did, in fact, find a Palestinian leadership that was willing to work with them. And they did. They made all sorts of concessions from 1993 with Oslo all the way until the entire project faltered. But the Palestinian Authority was kept in place because it served the purpose. And what was the purpose? Ensuring that Israel's security is intact. Thus, they turned the Palestinian leadership into a line of defense for the very settlements, the very colonies in the West Bank that is there, destroying the prospect of any Palestinian sovereignty in that region. And now they are coming back. Same old idea. No enforcement, no pressure on Israel, no sanctions. To the contrary, the conditions are imposed on the Palestinians, who are barely emerging from a genocide in Gaza. And they are also telling them, you have to behave yourself. You have to behave in a certain way and expect very little from this state. And maybe, potentially, perhaps it could happen. But by the way, we cannot force Israel to do anything. This is nonsense. It's utter and absolute nonsense. They are just buying time, and they are trying to diffuse the tension in their own societies. I'm talking to you from Rome right now. Rome is in a state of intifada for Palestine. I've never seen anything like this happening. 2 million people protesting 2 days in a row, basically shutting down the entire country. Consciousness over Palestine has become the subject of discussion at every layer of society, in places like Italy, in places like Spain. So all of these recognitions are really meant to try to diffuse the tension and to tell the masses that don't worry, we are on it, we are going to try to help in any way we can. But in actuality, they are still feeding Israel with all the military, with all the weapons and the munitions and the military contracts needed to ensure that the Palestinian people are being duly exterminated in Gaza.
Well, let me just ask you that on a final note, and I'm glad you mentioned Italy. Is I think a lot of people, I mean, we've seen this worldwide movement of solidarity with Palestine, and I think some people are thinking, well, okay, now there's a ceasefire. is it over essentially? But I think the point you're making is that for those who want to see an end to this, unbelievable genocidal and apartheid policy, now is not the time to stand down from the point of view of mass movements just because there's a ceasefire in place.
Absolutely. We are finally reaching our critical mass. We are there. We have been waiting for what we call our South Africa movement for decades, and we are there. And we cannot leave the square at this point because there's no peace plan here. Trump did not resolve an issue that has been going on for 3,000 to 5,000 years, he said at the Knesset. No sense of history whatsoever. We cannot buy into this, jargon. In reality, now it's our opportunity to mount the kind of global mobilization and solidarity that would finally isolate Israel and make Israel the pariah state that it deserves to be. Only when we achieve that, we can start getting political concessions. If we go home now thinking, well, the genocide is over, maybe we can coexist with military occupation and apartheid and racism and apartheid walls and colonial settlements. Well, you know what? Maybe there's a tiny little lull. Maybe there's a bit of a quiet. Maybe the rate of killing is going to be reduced slightly. But at the end of the day, it's going to start all over again. If you care about Palestine and if you care about justice, you care about human rights, then this is the moment that you actually continue marching as opposed to going back and thinking that the whole thing is over.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Ramzy Baroud, editor of the Palestine Chronicle, thank you so much for joining us here on the Freedom Side.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Definitely make sure you're following the Palestine Chronicle. I'm sure many of you are already. If you're not, definitely please do follow Dr. Baroud's work. He had a fantastic piece recently there, touching on many of the themes we touched on. So we really thank him for being willing to join us. We want to move now to our robot overlords and their future. That is the world of AI and what it is bringing to us. Perhaps not that great economic news, but we shall see. And to learn more about all of this, we are very, very honored, as always, to be joined by Michael Roberts, the socialist economist, author of many great books, and writer of the blog, The Next Recession. Michael, thanks so much for being back with us.
Thank you, Eugene. It's great to be with you again. Yes, I'm thinking about those robot overlords, so we can probably discuss that in some detail.
Indeed, yes, I hope so. And maybe we won't make it to that because the AI bubble will burst, which is where I want to start here. We have a graphic. I don't know if you'll be able to see this graphic, but it's essentially to explain it. It's everything that's being cycled around financially with NVIDIA right at the center there, but how you have just so many things going on here and this trillions of dollars through 10 or 12 companies. So give us a sense of what is the size of this AI bubble and why is it inflating so much?
Well, the bubble itself is to do with the investors piling in the stock market to buy all the companies you've got on that diagram. They're hoping that OpenAI, NVIDIA, all the other companies there, Intel, all the rest are going to dramatically increase the productivity of the US economy and bring huge profits to these companies. And so let's pile in and buy their shares now and keep on buying them until that happens. And at the same time, what we're finding is that these companies are spending huge amounts of money on investment in data centers and other infrastructure projects in order to, as it were, drive forward the artificial intelligence methods and the new models that they keep bringing out on regular occasions. So this is a massive boom that is driving the US economy, Eugene. If there hadn't been the spending that these companies have been making to build these centers and infrastructure, there'd be no growth in the US economy this year. Economists have taken out the investment that's been made, some 450 billion since in the last 3 years by these companies. If you take that out of the GDP, there's been no growth this year. That shows you how everything, the US economy now is one single bet on whether the AI is going to deliver higher productivity and therefore improve the standards of living for the American people. That is the bet. Is it a bet that's going to happen? I don't think so, because there's a massive investment that's taken place in the stock market, which is way over the top. That's what we mean by a bubble. It's just out of out of the level of what's actually going on in the real economy, because the rest of the US economy is not doing very well at all. Employment is falling, unemployment is rising, inflation is still with us. Lots of companies are finding it difficult to make any sort of profit at all. We've got young people who can't get work. There's a general increase in the price of goods in particular. Also, a huge increase in electricity prices, which is partly due to the AI companies massively increasing these data centers, which require huge amounts of water, huge amounts of electricity, and that's driving up electricity prices. So everything is depending on this delivering, these AI companies delivering productivity over the next few years. Otherwise, the whole thing is just going to crash.
No, I think that's such a good point. And because of the government shutdown, they did not release the CPI numbers so far for this month, which I think might be a blessing in disguise, because last month there was a 6.2 year-on-year increase percent-wise on electricity costs. So that might be even worse. And I think the point you're making here is so important, because how fragile the economy is. Like, I was looking the other day that at some statistics from the US government saying that there's $23 trillion in quote unquote runnables, or assets that are liabilities that are, subject to a metaphorical bank run, equivalent of 80% of the GDP. And these numbers were from the Federal Reserve. And the thing that blew me away is that they were saying that's not a big deal. They were like, oh yeah, $23 trillion, 80% of the GDP, but everything seems basically fine. But when you really start to look into this, a couple bad bets and a couple bad companies here and there could bring the whole thing down.
Yes, and one of the things that graph you showed, where everybody's these AI companies are all connected, they're all buying each other's, making contracts with each other, borrowing money from each other. So it's like a game of musical chairs, and they're all moving around these chairs. And if one of them slips up, possibly OpenAI, possibly NVIDIA, if they start slipping up and that chair is no longer available, we could start to see an implosion of this process of expansion, which has just got incredibly out of control. Now, maybe it'll work. Maybe after a big slump in the US economy, maybe after a few 100,000 or millions of American workers lose their jobs for a while, maybe the situation, whoever survives after that might be able to make some profit and regrow the economy. But do we want to go through that? Why should we have to go through this crash in order to achieve, as it were, the winners in this AI struggle which is going on at the moment? Because it's not just competition between the different AI companies or the desire to win. There's also got competition from abroad. There's lots of other AI operations going on in other countries, in China and France, which are cheaper, which are competing against these big companies in America. And they could very well undermine the process of gains that the AI companies makes. So it is a fragile situation. And viewers should be aware that over the next year or so, possibly earlier, we're going to see a different situation from this huge boom that we're seeing in the stock market now. And that could have repercussions for all of us, whether we've got jobs and living standards over the next year.
I mean, I think that's a great point. And I wonder if you think that to some degree this is behind the Federal Reserve policy in a way, because you pointed out in a recent piece that you did on the AI bubble that, there's sort of, and what I mean by the Federal Reserve policy, that they're sort of managing a controlled decline. Because as you pointed out, youth unemployment is rising, jobs that are exposed to AI, they're actually laying people off. Like, it's not a full-on collapse, but it is sort of a slow shedding around the economy. And it feels like a lot of what they're trying to do at the Fed is sort of say, well, we can't prevent the thing from going down, but maybe we can slow the rate of the fall.
Yeah, I think so. And then there's quite a lot of warning going on amongst the Fed, amongst the International Monetary Fund and other organizations saying, look, this is a tricky situation. It's getting out of hand, and there needs to be some moderation in the hyper frenzy that's going on in buying the stock market and all the assets of these companies at the moment. This is way over the top, and it could lead to a serious downturn in the opposite direction, which could have damaged everybody's future over the next year. And that's the issue before. So I don't think the Fed can do much about it. They're reluctant to cut interest rates to try and make it a bit easier. But what would happen if they did cut interest rates is that would just make borrowing cheaper. So investors into the stock market would just borrow more and keep piling into these stocks. And so there'll be even more of an uncontrollable bubble that could develop. And as you say, that what's eventually going to decide this, actually, my view, is whether AI actually manages to get rid of enough human labor, enough workers from the system, and replace it with these machine learning processes, which enable companies to do without a lot of labor. Then they can start to make a profit, but that will be at the expense of millions of workers. And that's the prospect that would happen if this is going to succeed. Mm-hmm. In the meantime, we could well have a financial crash.
The point you were making about cutting interest rates and things piling into the stock market, given the gentleman you have behind you, it reminds me of that quote from Marx in the Manifesto. So it's like the sorcerer who's no longer able to contain the spells he has conjured up from the netherworld. I mean, that really does seem to describe where we are with the economy. And I think it goes to a point you were making is, why do we have to go through this process of, some have called it creative destruction. I don't know how creative it is, of boom and bust and all these things. I mean, it seems to speak to the total just the bankruptcy of the capitalist system at this point in time, that the only way to allocate resources is just through random casino gambling rather than what people actually need to survive and thrive.
If we were thinking about it logically, the government would try to plan the use of these new technologies in order to retrain people to use them and also to bring them gradually into the system so that they can make gains, instead of it just being left to the complete anarchic process of companies signing contracts with each other, buying each other's shares, people piling in and hoping that this will... We've had this happen before. You talk about creative destruction. We've had it before in the history of capitalism. The railway boom in the 19th century was a massive bubble which launched away. And in the end, loads of companies crashed as a result of that. People lost their jobs. Eventually, of course, we still got the railways, but only through this process of destruction followed by the creation of this new technology. Do we really want to do that? Do we really want to see millions of American workers lose their jobs? Do we really want to see huge amounts of losses in people's living standards? Do we really want to see rising prices in energy and in water and elsewhere as a result of this maniacal approach which is being adopted to introduce this technology, assuming it works? I mean, we still don't know whether it will actually produce any greater improvement in the economies of the world by removing a lot of human labor and replacing it with machines that just learn and regurgitate everything that we've got and make it quicker, maybe. Will it work? Well, still remains to be seen.
Mm-hmm. Well, and let me ask you just one final question here before I let you go, because especially for those who watch late night TV here in the United States, there's many commercials about buying gold. If you're on social media, everything is get Bitcoin. And it's sort of being pitched to people as like, hey, we don't know what's going on with the world. Things could go good, things could go bad, but these are highly valued assets and you should spend your money on those because that's how you protect your money against a potential collapse in the stock market.
Well, I think that's what we're seeing. Gold price in US dollars, about $4,200 per gold ounce at the moment, which is an unbelievably historically high record. It shows that people are concerned, the investors anyway, or people who've got money to invest, are looking to keep out of dollars, keep out of currencies, keep out of other things. But it's part of the same bubble. The stock market is shooting up. Bitcoin prices have been shooting up. It's interesting that when President Trump said that he was going to put the tariffs up on Chinese imports again because the Chinese have been nasty about rare earth minerals. That produced a collapse in the market, but not in gold. Stock market went down, Bitcoin went down heavily, but gold stayed up because gold is seen as some sort of safe asset. That gold in your hand is going to be some sort of safe asset which you can use to protect your assets if it's not in dollars or in any other currency. And so gold seems to be this hedge which people turn to when there's uncertainty in the market. So I suspect that over the next 6 months, we could have a big crash in the stock market. We could have a crash in the Bitcoin sector, but not gold, because gold will be seen as a place to run to in such a situation.
Well, I always appreciate you coming on and helping us sort through it all. Michael Roberts, everyone has to read the Next Recession blog. Fantastic socialist analysis of what's going on in the economy around the world. Thanks so much, as always, for joining us here on the Freedom Side.
Thank you, Eugene.
Well, it's bleak, but certainly worth watching. And Michael does a great job. And for everyone who is like, I don't understand economics, the Next Recession blog, very simple, very straightforward, lots of graphs and things to help you sort of grasp it. So it's a great way to really understand the world from the right perspective, that my opinion of what the right perspective is. And that's a socialist perspective of where the economy needs to go. Well, before we get out of here, it is day 16 of the government shutdown in the United States. Obviously, it's a very serious situation. It's unclear how many federal workers will ultimately lose their jobs, but we know that the professional government job cutters, they're people who want to destroy the federal bureaucracy, are saying it could be as many as 10,000. Obviously, there's all sorts of challenges to the economy that this is creating, especially in the Washington, D.C. area. People in the military may not get paid coming up soon, which could be an interesting way to see how that ends up playing out. You've got air traffic controllers and others at TSA who have to work for free because they are essential employees. So they're just at the mercy of the government, but they're not making any money as they go in. And in fact, there's now a dispute over whether workers who are furloughed but not fired will be able to get back pay. So a lot of serious real world consequences that are going on in many different ways. And of course, we have to note that the reason the shutdown is happening is a very serious real world consequence. And that is that the Republicans are standing strong on kicking 15 million people off of healthcare. That is what this is about, and we have to remember this. There are other subsidiary cuts that the Republicans are making, but what the Democrats have made their stand on, what they say is, we will not go back, or we won't sign any deal. And that's what led to the shutdown in the beginning. That doesn't restore the cuts that are being made to Medicaid and the Affordable Care Act. And you can see it there on the screen. So 15 million people. You have a number of people who will be kicked off because of Medicaid getting cut, others who will be kicked off because they'll be losing subsidies and different things like that. But 15 million people getting kicked off of healthcare. That's what this is about. And not just 15 million people getting kicked off of healthcare, but 15 million people getting kicked off of healthcare, and also many millions of people losing access to important nutrition assistance in order to deliver massive tax cuts to the ultra wealthy. So you look at that chart that's right next to me now. Now notice what's happening here. $1.1 trillion in cuts to healthcare and other social programs, and $1.4 trillion in tax breaks for people making over $500,000, I believe is the graph. It's pretty close numbers there, 1.1 to 1.4. It's almost as if they're actually cutting critical social programs in order to hand over trillions of dollars to the ultra wealthy. Well, I think if you thought that, you'd be 100% right. In fact, when you actually look at how this breaks down, you can see this very interesting graph that the average tax cut for a millionaire could fund healthcare for 4 people. So you can see directly right there the trillions of dollars that are being transferred, the hundreds of billions of dollars that are being transferred away from programs like healthcare, away from programs like SNAP, are going directly into the pockets of the richest people they are. $80,000 tax cut for one millionaire, the equivalent to taking health insurance away from 4 people while reducing benefits for many, many more. So basically the average amount, and that's the other thing to remember about a lot of these, is these things are averages. But as you can see, the $1.1 trillion in cuts that are happening to healthcare in this country, $1.4 trillion that is being given away to the richest people, and each millionaire getting their tax cuts on average could be funding 4 people's healthcare. So this is an absolute robbing Peter to pay Paul, Peter being the working class of America, and Paul, of course, being the tiny, ultra wealthy, 1%, top 5%, top 10%, top 0.1%, the people making so much money you could never imagine that you would make that much money. And one thing I want to note about the 15 million people getting kicked off of healthcare is I think it's easy for everyone to understand the 15 million, the subset of those people who are being kicked off because of Medicaid. And that's the biggest chunk, the funding that's going to Medicaid, it's being cut. But a lot of the discussion is around the premium prices on the Affordable Care Act exchange. And, ultimately this is why the Affordable Care Act is in no way, shape, or form universal health care, and in many ways, was a boondoggle. It's just a giant subsidy to insurance companies, so it actually encourages them to increase costs. But be that as it may, the people who are using these subsidies to buy health care are not the ones who should pay the price. So you can see this graph that's next to me now, and this is just to give people a sense of the real dynamic toll here. If they phase out these subsidies, the premium tax credits, which is one of the key issues here, the annual out-of-pocket premium for most marketplace enrollees could go from $888 to nearly $2,000. So you can see, basically $1,000 of a jump in terms of how much the cost of healthcare would be if they phase this out. So for a lot of people, they just will go without healthcare rather than try to find a way to do it. And so, you've got the actual cuts of programs like Medicaid, and then these things like the effective cuts by just phasing out the subsidies. You make it too expensive and people go without healthcare, which, by the way, increases the cost for all of us, because if something really bad happens to people, they go to the emergency room. And of course, and rightfully, anyone who goes to the emergency room, they have to at least stabilize you. They don't have to necessarily solve what's going on, but they have to at least stabilize you. That can cost a lot of money. The government pays for those, what they're known as indigent patients. Now, of course, obviously, everyone should have the right to healthcare, so I'm not upset that people will go to the emergency room, but it just shows that even though it makes it seem like, oh yeah, we're getting rid of these costs because it's going to lower your taxes. Well, it's obviously not going to lower your taxes. It's going to lower the taxes of millionaires and billionaires, but that's actually not really the case. There's all these hidden costs that are increasing. The cost of your own healthcare, which is increasing a lot of times. Even if you have health insurance from your company, they may be having to raise the cost of it on you because the cost has been raised on them. But these secret hidden costs of people who still will get sick and still have emergencies and still need healthcare, that the cost will be passed on to all of us in sort of stealth ways that we never see. So that's another consequence of the 4.2 million people, I believe it is, that are undoubtedly at least going to lose healthcare because of this big almost $1,000 jump in the cost if the premium tax credits are phased out. So again, just to set the framing here for you, the reason the shutdown is happening and is on day 16 is Republicans have decided that they are going to kick 15 million people, working class people, many of the hardest working, lowest paid people in the country off of healthcare, that they are going to kick these 15 million people off of healthcare in order to be able to enact over $1 trillion in tax cuts that flow almost exclusively to the wealthy. And it's not just individuals, it's corporations, which is what has popped up next to me here now. Because in earnings calls, some corporations are already saying how much money they're going to save from this robbing Peter to pay Paul, take away your health care in order to make sure billionaires and rich corporations can get richer. They're saying how much money they're going to make. So you can see AT&T is saying they'll save between $1.5 and $2 billion this year. T-Mobile is saying they will save $1.5 billion in taxes this year. You've got some of these companies, Lockheed Martin, saying $500 million. You've got some companies that are actually already talking about how they're basically paying no taxes because the way they're able to do this, they're actually going to be getting tax refunds in many different ways from this context. So we have companies getting hundreds of millions of dollars, as much as $2 billion. Some of them may even save more. These are just the ones reporting it on Open's earning calls. Billions and billions of dollars from the richest and the biggest corporations. Does anyone believe that AT&T and T-Mobile are having any trouble financially whatsoever? Check your cell phone bill. I doubt you will agree that they are having any trouble, but they're still going to get an extra $1.5 to $2 billion on the backs of the 15 million people who are going to lose health care in this country, despite being some of the hardest working, lowest paid individuals in this country. The people working 2 jobs, 2 shifts, extra overtime just to be able to feed themselves and to feed their kids. The people who are working at Waffle House, at IHOP, at Dollar General, at the airport in some cases, even some of these TSA agents who are making very little money. I mean, this is the average working class person, the Amazon drivers, the truck drivers, the people who are not really making a lot of money at all, who are desperately struggling to make ends meet. Healthcare, 15 million of them, they're going to have healthcare stripped away from them. So AT&T can get a $1.5 billion tax break. And that's what the shutdown is about. Now, of course, the Democrats aren't doing much about it. As we told you last week, they are sending strong letters. They are urging Republicans who have some sense, which apparently they obviously don't, to come to the table and negotiate. So you can't count on that guy, Chuck Schumer. You can't count on Hakeem Jeffries. I think you can only count on yourself, and you can only count on the people around you. So I think for everyone who is deeply concerned about themselves being kicked off of healthcare, deeply concerned about others losing their healthcare and the cost to our society, who hate to see $1 trillion just given away to the richest people and corporations who are already richer than they've ever been in the history of human beings getting rich, people who are angry as hell that your electricity bill is going up 6%, 7%, that it's going to outpace inflation for all of 2026, and it's just because of data centers, who are mad because the right to free speech is being destroyed in this country because Trump doesn't want anyone to speak up against the smash and grab raid that is being waged on the working class right now in this country. Well, you shouldn't depend on the Democrats. You definitely shouldn't depend on the Republicans who you see on the screen there. But I think this is the time, this is the moment that a mass movement of individuals has to stand up and be counted and to push for change and to say that we have enough money and enough resources for everyone to have housing, healthcare, education, access to information, food, all of the basics to survive and, quite frankly, to thrive when we look at the state of the economy and what's possible, except for the hoarding of billionaires that creates all these artificial shortages. This Saturday, October 18th, is going to be a No King's Day rally all around the country, over 2,000 events. I'm just a journalist. I'm just a person. Just take this as my advice to you from an editorial perspective. If you're angry about the things that I just stated, if you're angry that neither of the two major political parties is doing anything about it, I would show up in the millions on Saturday wherever you can to show that the people are not going to be quiet, that they have their own agency, that they're not waiting for Trump, that they're not waiting for Schumer, that they're not waiting for Jeffries, that they're not waiting for Johnson, but they're going to take history in its own hands and change the world as they have historically over and over and over again. That'll do it for us here today on the Freedom Side. As I said, Rania Khalek will be back with us next week. We'll do the reveal of my Instagram with Rania Khalek. It's a little bit of a get well gift for her. She is very excited. I don't know if she's watching the show. If she is, shout out to Rania. We'll be very excited to have you back next week. Big thanks to all of our guests. Big thanks to really everyone who has made this show and made this network move forward, especially our patrons. Don't forget you can go to patreon.com/breakthroughnews in order to become a patron. Help keep us going and growing so we can continue to bring you the news and analysis that you have come to love here. For myself, for the whole Breakthrough News team, for Rania Khalek, who's out but will be back next week, we will see you next time.
Revolution knows no compromise. Revolution overturns and destroys everything that gets in its way.